Hi, and welcome back to Beans and Bezels. A few weeks ago, I posted on my website a very detailed and interesting conversation with Diyu, the founder of Solas watches, regarding his upcoming watch, the Starlight. I'm not going to spend time reintroducing this watch, but I urge you to read this interview if you wish to learn more about what motivated the creation of this piece. This watch was shipped to me directly from the manufacturer in China and bypassed Diyu's personal quality control check as well as movement regulation in Ireland. This was done in the interest of time to get the reviews out in time for the Kickstarter launch. Future watches will be personally inspected and regulated if necessary in Ireland. This watch is set to launch on Kickstarter at around $400. The Hangzhou 5000A movement and Aventurine dial take center stage with this watch, so I'm going to almost entirely skip over the case. Let's check it out. The case is 38mm in diameter, 44mm from lug to lug, and 9.7mm in height. The case shape is pretty typical for a dress watch and is entirely polished. The lug width is 20mm and the lugs curve down slightly beyond the case back, which I really like. There is a signed crown at the 3 o'clock position, and with a non-screwed on crown and large exhibition window case back, this watch is rated for up to 50 meters of water resistance, which is reasonable for a dress watch. The base of the dial is a single piece of Aventurine, with a small rectangular cutout for the date window at the 3 o'clock. The appearance of Aventurine is incredibly dynamic and the way it plays with light is beautiful, but this dial is painfully difficult to photograph, but I'll try my best to capture some of the blue hues and sparkles. As with most dress watches, there isn't an outer minute or seconds track, and the applied and polished stainless steel indices are the primary timekeeping references. The indices are well finished and sometimes reflect the dial finishing in photographs. This made macro photography very difficult. I'm a big fan of small seconds watches. There is an offset small seconds register between the 7 and 8 o'clock indices. The outer ring is polished stainless steel and there are markers for every 10-second element. These are printed and not applied. There is a small Dauphine style hand that is polished. The finishing is just okay on this, and I noticed some small marks on it under the macro lens. This is unfortunate, but for the $400 price tag, this is acceptable and not uncommon. There is a date window at the 3 o'clock position, and I would have preferred if there wasn't one. But as discussed in my interview with Diyu, he did not want to have a ghost date position, and this movement is only offered with a date, so this is the way it is. I'm not sold on the rectangular window design either, and I think a circular date window might have looked nicer given the circular case and circular seconds register, or maybe even a frame date window that continued the design of the indices. The hour and minute hands are also in a similar Dauphine style and are reasonably well finished. There were some marks on the hands but not visible to the naked eye and easily masked by the way it plays with light. Overall, this is a very interesting dial. It isn't going to be for everybody, but I think Diyu has done a great job of trying to do something different. Let me start off by saying that I'm not a watchmaker and have no experience making or servicing movements, but humor me while I make some observations about this movement. This is the Hangzhou 5000A and has been around for a few years now, but hadn't really picked up much interest. This movement has a date complication, 42 hours of power reserve, and beats at 28,800 beats per hour. It has a small seconds hand and is rated for plus or minus 25 seconds per day. This is a micro-rotor movement typically seen on high-end luxury watches and unheard of in the sub $500 range. Micro-rotor movements make better use of movement real estate and result in slimmer watches. They also look pretty awesome. On the inevitable topic of this movement being made in China, I don't really have a problem with Chinese movements, and I've got a Peacock SL3006 in my atelier in Hangzhou. I've had that watch for a little under 2 months now and the movement has performed well. The winding action isn't the best, but I have no complaints for what it costs. Similarly, this movement doesn't have the best feeling winding action, and the operating experience to adjust the time is a bit tactile and not smooth, similar to some Seiko NH35s that feel grainy. But it has been performing within spec, and I logged roughly minus 9 seconds per day over a 3.5 day period. Don't treat these numbers as concrete scientific results, but more as an indicator of the average behavior pattern. And I'd say this is acceptable for a $400 watch. This particular watch was not tested and regulated by DU in Ireland, so one could assume that slightly better performance is possible on the commercial units. The finishing on this movement is surprisingly impressive. The entire case back plate and rotor are finished with Geneva-style stripes and quite nicely executed too. Care has been taken to also finish a lot of the undersurfaces, and the base of the rotor cutout is finished with a decent perlage finishing. I don't believe I've seen a movement this well decorated for a $400 watch before. You'll most likely see Seiko NH35s and Miyota 8 and 9 series movements, which look quite boring and often very poorly decorated. To the naked eye, this movement looks like it belongs on a watch that is in the $1,000 category, but nothing in life is free, so where did they cut back? It appears that quality control is where corners are usually cut to make these movements available at these insane prices, and the 5000A is no different. Under my macro lens, I noticed a lot of fingerprints and dirt particles on the movement, and a piece of fiber or fuzz sitting on the backplate. To be fair to them, this isn't very different from the type of quality control seen on some Seiko movements too. Diyu assured me that the fiber of us would not have passed his quality control in Ireland, and that wasn't something future customers need to be worried about. But as a whole, I'm willing to live with a slightly less than ideal quality control, given that the finishing is excellent for the money and because I find the idea of a micro-rotor movement extremely fascinating. This watch is very comfortable on the wrist given its 38mm diameter, 44mm lug-to-lug width and roughly 10mm tall case. It sits very low on the wrist and definitely checks all boxes for a dress watch. These watches come with a leather strap and a stamped stainless steel deploying clasp. The clasp is good and the leather strap is alright. You can't expect the best from a $400 watch that is already delivering plenty in the dial and movement department. But this is good enough until you can pick out your replacement. This is a very cool watch that is packing some interesting features. To get a micro-rotor movement for around $400 is pretty exciting stuff for a lot of us watch folk. The Aventurine dial is nice to have too, so there isn't much to complain about by way of value for money. The Starlight to me is a conversation piece or an occasion piece. I couldn't see myself wearing this every day because the dial is a bit too extravagant for me. But I can see that this has been designed with passion, and those that decide to back this project are going to get something very unique. I wish Diyu the best of luck with this campaign, and I hope to see more of this movement in other Solas watches in the future. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to read the full length review in the link below.